The shuttle hissed as it sealed into the docking cradle of Minerva Station, the largest interspecies academic vessel in the Zeta Lyrae system. Aboard it, Charles Norell adjusted the strap of his duffel bag and exhaled. He could already feel the artificial gravity shift slightly under his boots. Minerva used a hybrid rotational system to simulate Earth's standard gravity, but it always felt like walking on a slow-moving escalator. "Passengers, please proceed to your assigned orientation halls," the overhead voice announced, filtered through a dozen translation layers. Charles followed the stream of new arrivals, most of whom were not human. He noticed at least 5 species he couldn't name, including one tall, bioluminescent being whose skin changed shades with every step. He tried not to stare. He had been selected as one of 3 human instructors for the new intercultural biology exchange program. His Earthbound colleagues had joked about him becoming a walking exhibit, Professor Exhibit A, someone had said. But Charles didn't mind. Teaching biology to alien students was the opportunity of a lifetime. In Orientation Hall C, he was met by an administrator with translucent skin and eyes like submerged pearls. "You are Charles Norell, correct?" it asked, voice translated through a small orb hovering near its shoulder. "That's me," Charles said, offering a handshake instinctively, then retracting it halfway. "Sorry. Habit." The administrator blinked slowly. "We have been briefed on human customs." "I accept." It extended a limb, and they shook briefly, gently. The room was arranged like a tiered amphitheater, and Charles was introduced as a representative of human biology and terrestrial adaptability. His lecture would come later, but first, he had to participate in a student Q&A. The students arrived in a flurry of movement, chittering, slithering, or gliding into the seats. One of them, a short, broad-shouldered alien with overlapping scales and a single eye, raised a limb. "Your skin is different in the pre-boarding photo," it said. It was lighter. "Now it is darker." "Why?" Charles blinked, caught off guard. He glanced down at his forearms. They were noticeably tanned, a shade or 2 darker than the ID photo on his badge. "Oh, that?" he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "We tan under sunlight." The room fell silent. "You alter your skin through exposure to radiation?" another student asked, this one tall and gelatinous, with a softly glowing core. "Well, yeah," Charles said. "Ultraviolet radiation, to be specific. It triggers melanin production in our skin. It's a natural response. Helps protect us." The room erupted not with laughter, but with murmurs and data pads being activated. "You willingly expose yourself to radiation?" the first student said again, louder this time. "Well, not always willingly," Charles replied. "Sometimes it just happens. You go out for a hike, skip the sunscreen, come back darker. If you overdo it, though, you get burnt." "Burnt?" a whisper from the back echoed. "Yeah. Painful. Red skin. Peeling. Not fun." Another student leaned forward, whispering to the gelatinous one beside it. "They adapt to radiation. Through pain." Charles chuckled nervously. "We try not to, but when we do, yeah. It's not ideal, but it's how our bodies work." The administrator approached, blinking its pale eyes. "Perhaps, Charles, you could demonstrate the process over time. A controlled exposure. For educational purposes. You want me to tan for science? If it is safe and replicable." He sighed. "All right, but I'll need sunlight." A week later, Charles was standing in the biodome, shirt off, arms folded behind his head. The dome simulated a range of planetary environments. Today, it mimicked a summer day in Arizona. He felt like a rotisserie chicken. Students watched from behind a transparent barrier, whispering and recording data. The administrator had insisted that at least one control group observe his skin before and after every session. On day 3, Charles started to burn. He stepped into the observation room, right across the shoulders and neck, wincing. "You were damaged," the scaled student said, sounding almost accusatory. "No, not damaged. Just overexposed." "You sacrificed your dermal integrity to illustrate a biological process?" "I wouldn't say sacrificed. It's temporary." "How temporary?" Charles glanced at his shoulder in the mirror. 2, maybe 3 days. Then it'll peel." "Peel?" "Yeah. The dead skin flakes off. New skin underneath. It's normal." The gelatinous student made a sound that resembled a wet balloon deflating. "You molt." "In a way, sure." The administrator looked intrigued. "Might we collect the molted material?" "Please don't." Despite his discomfort, Charles continued the sessions. The students were fascinated not just by the tanning itself, but by the biological chain reaction it represented. They began to ask questions not just about skin, but about evolutionary pressures, environmental adaptation, and human responses to extreme climates. 2 weeks in, Charles developed a fever. The medical unit confirmed it was sun poisoning. He was ordered to rest, hydrate, and stay out of the biodome for at least 5 days. When the students heard, they arrived at the infirmary en masse. "You were harmed," one said. "I'll be fine," Charles replied, voice hoarse. "Just need rest." "Your species accepts harm as a byproduct of learning?" He smiled weakly. "Sometimes we don't plan it that way. We just learn through mistakes." The gelatinous student leaned forward. "Your species is confusing. Tell me about it." By the time Charles returned to teaching, he had a patchy tan and a lingering cough. The students, however, had compiled a comprehensive report on human skin response, complete with diagrams, recovery timelines, and speculative evolutionary comparisons. One afternoon, the scaled student raised a new question. "Your skin changes color, you molt, you regenerate. But you do not control it consciously?" "Right," Charles said. "It's all automatic." "That is inefficient." He laughed. "Maybe, but it works." The administrator approached. "We have decided to approve an interspecies comparative biology course. Your demonstration was effective." Charles nodded. "Glad to help." And the administrator added, "We have ordered 12 UV lamps for further studies." Oh God. The next semester, Charles found himself supervising students as they attempted to replicate the tan effect on artificial human skin models. One group accidentally melted the synthetic epidermis, flooding the lab with a burnt plastic smell. "Too much UV," Charles shouted through the safety glass. "Dial it down. Radiation thresholds are lower than anticipated," the gelatinous student said, noting it on a tablet. Back in the dormitory hallway, Charles encountered a new student. It blinked at him. "You are the one who burns under light?" "Yep." The student nodded solemnly. "Your species is terrifying." He grinned. "We're just trying to make the most out of what we've got." Later that night, Charles stood under the artificial sky of the biodome, watching a simulated sunset. He touched his arm, now a shade darker than when he'd arrived. Painful as it had been, he realized the entire experience had taught him more than he had taught the students. Adaptation wasn't just about biology, it was about communication, vulnerability, and sometimes, standing half-naked in front of a room full of aliens to explain why your skin looked like overcooked meat. And somehow, that made it all worth it. The hydroponics lab wasn't designed for interspecies debate, but that didn't stop it from becoming one. Rows of oxygenating plants hummed softly in the background, casting a green hue across the bench where Charles sat, sipping from a cup of electrolyte broth. It tasted like salted cabbage water, but the station's medical AI insisted it was optimal for dermal regeneration. He tried not to gag between sips. "You ingested a root solution intended for soil pH stabilization," said the gelatinous student Talik. He had finally learned watching him from across the workstation. "I did not," Charles said, offended. "It was in the nutrition dispenser. Someone just mislabeled it." "You were not hospitalized?" "Nope." Talik's gelatinous mass contracted and rippled. "Your internal systems neutralized a compound that corrodes most known organics. I threw up for 6 hours and hallucinated a conversation with a sentient fern. That's not neutralizing. That's surviving by accident." There is growing consensus among observational committees that humans are chemically reckless. Not inaccurate. A new student entered the lab, a tall being with an exoskeleton that shimmered like brushed copper. It moved with careful, clicking steps and took a seat beside Talik. "You are the one who suffered photodermal trauma voluntarily," it said. Charles sighed. "Sure. Let's go with that. I am Rivek," it continued. "Your name is difficult. I will refer to you as Instructor Mammal." "That's not going to boost my self-esteem," Charles muttered. "But okay." Rivek placed a small data slate on the table. "I reviewed your medical scans. Your cardiovascular system increased circulation to the skin during UV exposure. This seems wasteful. It's called inflammation. The body sends extra blood to help heal the area." Rivek tilted its head. "You self-ignite as a healing mechanism?" "No. God. No. It's just warmth and swelling. Not combustion. Unfortunate. Combustion would be more efficient." Talik's surface pulsed a dull blue. "Instructor Mammal, I believe you are overdue for a follow-up dermal integrity scan. Yeah, I have that in 20 minutes. Level 5 infirmary. Would it be acceptable for us to observe? You want to watch me get my skin scanned? Rivek nodded. For scientific rigor. Fine, but no touching. Last time someone poked me mid-skin, I flinched so hard, I nearly broke the machine. 20 minutes later, Charles lay shirtless on a narrow exam bed while a diagnostic wand hovered centimeters above his shoulder. The scanner emitted a low hum and projected heat maps onto the adjacent monitor. Talik and Rivek stood silently behind a transparent partition, taking notes. Your epidermis is shedding irregularly, the attending med tech said, adjusting the wand's angle. Patchy exfoliation. Standard for your species. Yeah. I peel like a cheap sticker if I overdo it. The tech tapped a few keys. You're also showing elevated histamine levels. Are you experiencing itchiness? Like a rolled in fiberglass. I'll recommend an antihistamine patch. Topical, slow release. Thanks. From the other side of the glass, Talik pressed its mask to the interface. Does the peeling serve a communicative function? It asked. Like the chromatophores of the Lyrite eel? No, Charles said. It's not for signaling. It's just damage control. Rivek leaned closer to the glass. You lose parts of your body and discard them without distress? I mean, it's not like I keep a scrapbook. Remarkable, said Talik. The medtech applied a small adhesive patch to Charles's upper arm. It tingled cold against his skin. You'll need to avoid sun simulations for at least 4 days, the tech said. Let your skin stabilize. Understood. Back in the corridor, Charles pulled on his shirt gingerly and noticed that both Talik and Rivek were still watching him. Is this going to become a daily thing? He asked. Me shedding and you cataloging it. This data is invaluable, Talik said. There is also speculation that your resilience may be linked to your planet's volatile environment, added Rivek. Yeah, Earth's a mess. Hurricanes, volcanoes, venomous, everything. You want to study trauma-based evolution? We're a gold mine. Rivek paused. You mentioned venomous organisms. You coexist with them. Coexist is generous. We try not to get bitten. You are not immune? Definitely not. Some of them kill within minutes. Talik undulated in what Charles had come to recognize as surprise. And yet you continue to inhabit such a planet. We're stubborn. Rivek's mandibles clicked softly. We would like to examine your immune response next. Let's not arrange for me to get stung by anything. Noted. Later that cycle, Charles returned to his quarters and found a sealed container outside his door. Inside was a note written, surprisingly, in decent English with a single sentence. Instructor mammal, please apply this ointment to a localized area and report effects. He groaned. The ointment was a pale green gel, sparkling faintly under the light. Against his better judgment, he dabbed a small amount onto the inside of his forearm. It tingled, then cooled, then turned hot enough to make him yelp. The patch of skin turned temporarily translucent, revealing a network of blood vessels beneath. He stared, fascinated and horrified. Well, that's new. The effect wore off after 20 minutes. He logged the reaction and left a message for Talik. Whatever that was, I'm impressed and mildly alarmed. The next day, he found himself summoned to a panel discussion on interspecies resilience, where he was the only human among 10 panelists. The moderator, a crystalline organism with a voice like wind chimes, introduced him as the biological anomaly from Sector Earth. Charles leaned into the mic. Nice to be here. I think. A small, fur-covered creature 2 seats down raised a limb. Is it true you survived a fungal bloom in your food storage unit without protective gear? I wouldn't say survived. I coughed for a week and lost my sense of taste. Yet you did not perish? Nope. But I did eat a shoelace by mistake. They looked like noodles. The room murmured. The moderator gestured with a flick of light. It appears your species lacks internal consistency. You are vulnerable, yet you persist. That's the human condition in a nutshell. Rivek, seated in the audience, stood. Instructor mammal, would you agree that your species compensates for physical inadequacy with excessive improvisation? Absolutely. The panel concluded with cautious applause and a request for Charles to submit tissue samples for further study. He politely declined. Back in the hydroponics lab, Talik was waiting. You have been scheduled for a resilience demonstration next cycle. Defined demonstration. You will be exposed to simulated terrestrial hazards. Mild ones. What counts as mild to you? Simulated windstorm, dehydration, and minor allergen exposure. You're trying to kill me with hay fever? Only in the name of science. Charles rubbed his temples. Fine. But if someone sneezes glitter on me again, I'm walking. Rivek arrived moments later, carrying a sealed container. We have prepared an allergen vapor derived from native earth pollen. Terrific. The lamp in the lab dimmed slightly as the station rotated. Charles looked around at the aliens surrounding him, curious, analytical, respectful in their own strange ways, and wondered if any of them had ever had to explain why they sunburned, shed skin, and hallucinated after eating mislabeled soup. He doubted it. But for all their sleek biology and engineered immunity, none of them had ever tried to turn that into a semester-long curriculum. That, he figured, was the most human thing of all. The allergen test chamber was colder than Charles expected. Lavender-colored walls pulsed faintly as the filtration system cycled through the last batch's residue. He stood barefoot on the polymer floor, arms extended as a fine mist began to spray from overhead vents. The vapor had a faintly sweet smell, like dried peaches and printer ink. Outside the chamber, Rivek and Talik monitored readings from a console embedded into the wall. Neither blinked, Talik because it had no eyes and Rivek because its inner eyelids only closed during REM cycles, which Charles still found unsettling. Still breathing, Charles called out, raising his voice slightly to be heard through the barrier. Your heart rate has increased, Rivek observed. Is that a sign of distress or anticipation? Neither, Charles said. I had a double espresso before this. Probably a mistake. Talik adjusted a control. Initiating second stage dispersion. Low concentration terrestrial birch pollen analog. The mist thickened. Charles shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to ignore a growing itch behind his left eye. Okay, he said, blinking. Yep. There it is. Describe the sensation, Rivek said. Like someone scrubbed my sinuses with fiberglass. My throat's getting dry, and I'm 90 seconds away from sneezing violently. You may expel mucus at will, Talik said helpfully. Thanks for the permission. 2 sneezes later, the mist stopped. A soft chime signaled the end of the trial. Charles stepped out of the chamber, nostrils flaring, eyes red. Success? He asked, grabbing a towel from the nearby bench and wiping his face. You demonstrated an acute histamine reaction consistent with terrestrial allergen exposure, Rivek said, handing him a sealed drink pouch. This contains electrolytes and mild antihistamines. He took a sip. It tasted like cucumber and regret. Do your species commonly expose themselves to irritants for research? Talik asked. Not usually on purpose, Charles said, rubbing his eyes. But sometimes we're curious enough to be stupid. Or desperate enough to try anything. Rivek turned toward the console. Your skin temperature increased by 3 degrees. Is fever a defensive mechanism? It can be, Charles said. But this is more likely just my body kicking up activity across the board. Like turning on every light in the house just to find your keys. Wasteful. Effective. Talik's surface shimmered a dull green. We have compiled a report. Your immune system appears less specialized than most species present aboard Minerva, yet it demonstrates remarkable flexibility. We call it getting by. Later that evening, Charles sat on the edge of his cot in the quarters he shared with 2 human researchers who were both off station. The silence was welcome. He peeled off his socks, noting a faint rash blooming across his ankles from the mist exposure. Harmless, but obnoxious. He activated the hollow terminal and began reviewing the preliminary data Talik had forwarded. Phrases like non-selective mast cell response and epithelial microabrasion scrolled past, but the graphs told the story more clearly. His body had flared up, flailed around, then settled down. Typical. There was a knock, 3 soft taps against the metal doorframe. Rivek stood there, holding a thin case. I require clarification. Charles gestured him inside. Shoot. Rivek entered, posture tight. Your allergic response was inefficient but recoverable. However, your subsequent sleep cycle appears disrupted. What? You're monitoring my sleep? Station policy requires biometric tracking during active studies. Charles leaned back against the wall. My nose was stuffed. I couldn't breathe right. You did not seek medical intervention. It wasn't serious. Rivek tilted its head. You accept discomfort as a natural state? Sometimes, yeah? Humans put up with a lot if we think it's temporary. Fascinating. Charles frowned. Wait, you knocked just to ask about my sleep pattern? Rivek opened the case. Inside was a folded garment, soft, light gray, with an embedded collar tag. I designed a sleeping tunic with integrated ventilation and microfiltration for your sinuses. It should mitigate pollen residue exposure and improve airflow during rest. Charles blinked. You made me pajamas? Correct. He took the tunic, running his hand over the fabric. Thanks. That's surprisingly thoughtful. It is inefficient to observe a subject in suboptimal condition if the condition can be improved. The next morning, Charles arrived in lecture room Delta wearing the tunic under his uniform. It worked. He'd slept straight through without waking once. Talik and Rivek were already inside, joined by 3 new students, one with a translucent skullcap, another with a carapace like old ceramic, and a third that communicated using shifting scent plumes. Charles cleared his throat. Today's topic is physical trauma and recovery. The ceramic-plated student raised one limb. Do you possess regenerative capabilities? Depends on the severity, Charles said. Small cuts? We heal. Broken bones? Takes weeks. Lost limbs? Not so much. Unacceptable, said the student. We make do. Talik shifted toward the board. Instructor Mammal has agreed to demonstrate dermal repair following minor laceration. Charles nodded. I'll be using a sterilized training scalpel. No deeper than the epidermis. He pressed the blade gently against his forearm. A thin red line appeared, beading with blood. The students leaned forward not with horror, but fascination. Talik immediately began scanning. Clotting initiated within 7 seconds, it said. Fibrin network forming. Rivek added, inflammation localized. Minimal fluid loss. Charles wiped the cut clean and applied a sterile dressing. In a few days, this'll scab over, then peel. No permanent damage. The student with the scent-based communication released a burst of citrus and iodine, a signal Charles had learned to associate with surprise. You intentionally injured yourself to demonstrate healing, Rivek said. That's what a demonstration is. Your species' pain threshold is unpredictable. Charles chuckled. We complain a lot, but we keep going. After the session, the students filed out. Rivek lingered. You endure harm to teach others. You accept discomfort to provide data. You recover slowly, yet you adapt in ways we struggle to model. It's not glamorous, but it's ours. You believe that slow recovery and persistence are strengths? Sometimes they're all we've got. Rivek stood silent for a moment, then extended one segmented hand. I have requested that your tunic design be added to the station's adaptive wear catalog. It will be named the Norell pattern. Charles laughed. You're naming sleepwear after me? You found usefulness in discomfort. That is worth honoring. He shook Rivek's hand. It was cool and oddly satisfying, like squeezing a well-built prosthetic. Later that week, Talik presented him with a printout of the full allergen trial report. At the bottom, a note had been added in bold glyphs. Subject displayed high tolerance for systemic variability and discomfort. Recommend designation, Homo sapiens endurance specialist. Charles pinned it to the wall above his cot. Not bad for someone who'd hallucinated a fern and sneezed his way through a science experiment. He climbed into bed, pulled on the tunic, and let the gentle airflow hum against his skin. For the first time in a long while, he felt understood, not just studied. The lights dimmed, and the room fell silent, save for the quiet breath of a human body healing, adapting, and resting.